So welcome. It's great to be with you all. I'm not sure if you were with us for the Springfield Parish plenary session just prior to this, but I'm joining you not from my home and not from my office, but from one of the parishes that I have the privilege to work alongside and journey alongside in this journey of how do we evangelize in the church today. So it's great to be with you. I suppose the blurb that I put out around this sense of co-responsible evangelising leadership, I want to start there. So what I said in the blurb was co-responsibility recognises that all Catholics are called through our baptism to become missionary disciples and to take our place in serving the evangelising mission of the church. If we are to build parishes that are centres of constant missionary outreach, as Pope Francis spoke about in Evangelii Gaudium, this requires not just a parish priest plus one or two leaders, but teams of leaders whose strengths and giftedness complement each other. And as the church looks to the future, we need leadership teams of clergy and laity working together because our hopes and our dreams are too big to realise on our own. I started in this role of parish leadership in 2020 with the Archdiocese of Brisbane, and the word co-responsible was thrown around a lot. But when it came down to actually getting down to the heart of what it means, I found that it was a little bit difficult to understand what people's hearts were and how people related to that word. And so it sent me on a bit of a journey of looking into a bit of the history of where the word came from. And as my understanding goes, it's really something that came out of Vatican II. And it was something that lots of the bishops brought back from Vatican II to their parishes and to their dioceses. Pope Benedict, it can be hard to actually find where he said it, but he said it at one of his addresses in 2012. Pope Benedict, let's see if it will let me shift. There we go. Speaks about co-responsibility in that it requires a change in mentality, particularly with regard to the role of the laity in the church, who should be considered not as collaborators with the clergy, but as persons truly co-responsible for the being and activity of the church. The reality is that the church talking in this language in the 1960s was really, it was ahead of its time when it comes to understanding what leadership looks like. Leadership research today suggests that the best leadership in any organisation, not just church organisations, the best leadership is provided by teams rather than by a single shining star of a leader. And so the church was recognising this back in the 1960s, that the complementarity of people leading together will provide better leadership than relying on an individual to be all things to all people. Now, excuse me, whether we've actually been able to make that the reality on the ground is one thing, but the fact that we were already thinking like this back in the 1960s and now leadership research is backing this up is really quite fascinating to me. So what does a co-responsible evangelising leadership team look like, sound like, or feel like? And I want to, excuse me, I want to just take three elements of what I believe a co-responsible evangelising leadership team looks like. The first one is ownership. So sorry, my throat is a little bit dry this morning. Every member of the leadership team feels a personal sense of responsibility for the mission of the church. And what is the mission of the church? The mission of the church is to evangelize, to make missionary disciples. Often we use the word collaboration in this context. I don't know if that's been your experience, but when I work with parish leadership teams, we often talk about collaboration. And collaboration is a good word, but collaboration in practice often looks like consultation, And I believe co-responsibility is asking us to be more than just consultative. It's asking us to ownership. Collaboration can give the impression that lay people are collaborating in a ministry that is not their own, but rather it's just the ministry of the priest. So the priest has a ministry, and the lay people are invited into that ministry, but there's not necessarily a sense of ownership. As Pope Benedict says, it's important to deepen and to live out the spirit of profound communion in the church, which characterized the early Christian community. It's reflected in the book of the Acts of the Apostles, where Luke writes, "Now the company of those who believed were of one heart and one soul." The company of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. There was a sense of unity in that space, of sharing collectively in the mission of the church. There was unity and there was ownership. Each of us has our own call. I'm so sorry. Each of us is called into missionary discipleship by the nature of our baptismal call. And so, because of our baptism, we are called into ownership of the church's mission too. Co-responsibility says the mission and the ministry of the church is owned by everyone, and not just in some kind of fluffy sort of theoretical sort of way. I believe our leadership teams need individuals who have a giftedness for forward thinking, for strategic thinking, and who are gifted in mentoring and empowering leaders. I don't think it's just the priests who need to be mentoring and empowering leaders in the parish, but it's also the lay people within the church itself who need to also be finding the leaders, the emerging leaders from within the parishioners and calling them into leadership. I believe our leadership teams need to be delegated authority by the parish priest to be able to do this work well. And this leads me to our second point. Co-responsible evangelizing leadership needs clarity and it needs structure. We need structures to support co-responsibility. And I'm not sure whether our understanding of how we've used pastoral councils in Australia, at least in the past, necessarily reflects this. I can only speak to my experience in the Brisbane Archdiocese, but in coming alongside many parish pastoral councils, I often ask the question, do you believe that this is a functional body, or do you believe that, or are you not clear on its purpose? And time again, I'm finding that parish pastoral councils don't necessarily understand what their purpose is. And they often end up looking like one of three things, really. The first one is they're a report receiving body. And so if there are any ministries like St. Vincent de Paul or like sacramental preparation, the purpose of the pastoral council is to receive reports from the ministries. So that's one function that I have heard from parish pastoral councils. The second function that I've heard is seeing themselves as an advisory committee. And so it's an advisory committee for whatever the parish priest might have a question about. And it can be anything. It might be whether the pews need to change. That has been one that I've heard in the past, or whether the car park needs to change. But what it ends up meaning is all they're doing is responding to any particular issue that is coming up in the moment for the parish priest. And then the third way that it's been traditionally used is that the parish pastoral council ends up being the doers of the parish. So they're the ones who the parish priest can always rely on to be the volunteers who will greet at the door, who will be there for the parish fundraiser, who will do all of the things, who will always put their hands up. All of those things are wonderful service to the parish, but they don't necessarily lend themselves to the kind of co-responsible evangelising church that we want to be together. My team is, so let me just tell you a little bit about my job. My team is the parish leadership team within Evangelisation Brisbane for the Archdiocese of Brisbane. And so EB's mission is to inspire, support, and empower parishes and communities to encounter Jesus and live the joy of the gospel. So that's what we exist for. And then my team within that, our mission is to create the foundations parishes need to grow missionary disciples. So what do those foundations look like? We work with parishes. One of the key things that we do is we work with parishes to develop a 5-year strategic plan for their parish. This whole process of just creating a strategic plan takes 6 months, and then the implementation of a strategic plan is normally about 4.5 years. Now, why do we take so long? It's because we recognise that strategy is one piece of the puzzle, so understanding where you want to go and how you're going to get there as a parish. The other piece of the puzzle is culture, and understanding that if we're going to move in a direction like this, we also need to be addressing really clearly what the culture is of the parish. Because a parish will have a culture no matter what. But if you're going to try to put a strategic plan together, you want to make sure that you are being intentional about what you want your culture to look like, sound like, and feel like. So that's just a bit of a background, because one of the things I want to speak to you about is one of the first things that we do in the process. And that is we help parishes to build a mission chart. It looks like an organisational chart, but it's basically specifically around the mission of the parish. So this is just one example from the parish of Regent's Park that we've worked with. Now, what you'll see here is you've got the finance council and the parish priest. You've got the parish staff who sit underneath the parish priest, but they're the executors, so that's why they're sitting in blue. We have the parish leadership team sitting underneath the parish priest. And next to that, you see the 3 communities, and these are the churches of Regent's Park. So they've got Our Lady of Assumption, we've got St Bernardines, and we've got St Catherine's. And this is the reality for at least many of our parishes here in the Brisbane Archdiocese. There are, our parishes might be one parish, but might have many churches within it. And then underneath the parish leadership team, you can see that there are 6 ministry areas. So the process for building a structure like this is, it might feel a little bit mundane, it might feel a little bit too detailed, but for us, we find it really critical. And we call this step building our sandboxes. So in this exercise, what we do is we get the parishes to group all of the activities that a parish does or want to do into ministry areas, and we go through a process to do that. And once they've grouped all of the activities that a parish does or wants to do into these key ministry areas, normally what ends up is a list, so children and families might have baptismal preparation, it might have sacramental preparation, it might have a primary aged youth group, it might have a kids club, it might have liturgy of the word on Sundays, and the list can go on. It might have a mums group, it might have family retreats. And often what you end up with is a list of about 20 different activities. Then what we ask for the parish council or the parish leadership team to be brutally honest and say, what out of those 20 activities have to happen? That they need to continue no matter what. And normally what will be on that list is perhaps sacramental preparation and baptismal preparation, and that kind of might be it. And then the others, we ask them to list as optional. And then thirdly, we ask them to write the vision statement of each of these areas. Now, what this whole process does, and why we call it a sandbox activity, is because what we're doing is we are defining the edges of each of these teams' ministry areas. We're setting them up with their area to play in. And we do that so that it's really clear this is the responsibility of the children and families team. And the parish leadership team with the parish priest are giving this team permission to work within these parameters. They know what's essential, they know what's optional, but they know the heart and the vision for what this area is too. And we want them to get creative. We want them to own this space and make it their own space. Of course, there's always communication backwards and forwards, but they need to feel like it's their own. And that's where it speaks to that ownership, that first point. The only way that we can give people ownership is if we also give them clarity and structure. Brené Brown is one of my favorite leadership speakers and leadership researchers, and she says, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. And to become a co-responsible church, we need to get clear on how clergy and laity can authentically serve the mission side by side together. And what you can see we're trying to do here in a mission chart like this is we're trying to use the Catholic social teaching concept of subsidiarity within a parish context itself, of getting clear on responsibility and pushing responsibility down to the lowest possible level so that we can build up leaders on all levels within a parish. And so that everything isn't bottlenecked always with the availability of the parish priest, because he knows his people and they know him, and there is a level of understanding of where they're headed together. The other part to this whole picture that you can see in front of you is the leadership team, this parish leadership team. And we call it a decision-making body. Now, anyone who has had any conversation around what that means in parish pastoral councils, calling it a decision-making body sounds like it's going against canon law. But let me explain what I mean by this. In any organisation these days, there is usually an executive team who are the senior level leaders of the organisation, and then you've got a CEO. And any CEO worth their salt would ensure that decisions are made collectively with their senior leadership team, because it's only when we make these decisions together that, number one, it increases buy-in. Number two, it ensures that the leader hasn't made the decision with blind spots in place. And number three, it makes sure all of the possible ideas and ways of deciding have been considered, and you're making the best decision you can with the information that you have. Now, on the odd occasion, that CEO might make an executive call, either because they have to on the spot or because people weren't available. But what they've done is they've built enough trust and relationship with their leadership team that they're happy to run with those decisions when they need to, because they understand that the vision and the mission of the parish are too important, the vision and the mission of the organisation are too important, and things need to keep moving forward. It's the same for leadership teams within parishes. The parish priest is still the decision maker ultimately, and the person who still carries the responsibility of the parish. But we're moving away from this concept that they have to be all things to all people and the ones that have all of the knowledge. That's no longer realistic. And so what a parish priest needs is a leadership team who feel empowered, who feel the same sense of ownership for the vision and the mission of the parish, and who want to make it happen just as much as he does. We need leadership teams where individuals on them have clear responsibilities and feel like they are invited into the decision-making processes. And if the leadership team is operating as an authentic team, there is this sense of trust and understanding that we're all moving in the same direction together and we all want the same thing, and we're going to have the conversations we need to have to get there. So even though it mightn't necessarily line up with our previous understanding of how parish pastoral councils operate within canon law, Father Frank Morrissey would say that ultimately, when it comes to the decision-making of a pastoral council, all of the 4 steps leading up to, or the steps leading up to the decision-making moment, the lay people of the community are involved in those and in the review of the decision to decide whether it actually worked. And so I think it's merely a reimagining of what canon law asks of us, which is that we come alongside one another, lay and clergy alike, to make these decisions together. The third point of being a co-responsible evangelizing leadership is authentic relationships. And I suppose what comes alongside that is this idea of vulnerability and community. I am a firm believer that we as a church need to learn what it is to live authentically in community once more. And one of our key obstacles to this is a lack of communication. Community life is messy and is hard. Just ask our brothers and sisters who live in religious communities. What happens when we live authentically in community is we are faced with the annoying habits and personalities of others. And do you know what else? Sometimes when we live in authentic community, it holds up a mirror to our own annoying habits and issues ourselves. And so what happens is when we start to move into that space, it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. And when we're starting to have our own weaknesses shine up too, we start to want to avoid. It's our natural tendency to move away from discomfort and into comfort. And so what happens in our leadership teams is we never get beyond that surface. We never get into the stages where we're actually living authentically because it starts to get too uncomfortable. But what we're called to do is to push through the discomfort to authentic relationships. And if we actually avoid authentic community, I think because of the messiness and because of the unpleasantness that can sometimes come from conflict or different things like that, we also end up avoiding the glorious beauty of community too. Authentic community opens our eyes to the wonder of God. It opens us to growth. It gives us an opportunity to celebrate victories in each other's lives, to sit with each other in our grief, to laugh in our joy. And it opens us to new perspectives, new ways of seeing things. It broadens our horizons. And when we avoid community, we diminish ourselves and who God is calling us to be. Look, I just wanted to point out these 3 key points. There is so much more I could say around co-responsible evangelizing leadership. But I suppose what I want to end with is my vision for parish leadership. Because to me, it comes to the heart of what co-responsible evangelizing leadership is. When I started in this role, I was asked to give my I have a dream Martin Luther King Jr. moment. And when I started thinking about this, I couldn't help but lean into Pope Francis's dream. Pope Francis said, "I dream of a missionary option. That is a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world, rather than for her self-preservation." My dream is that leaders in our parish would be leaders who are driven by this missionary impulse Pope Francis talked about, that is capable of transforming everything in parish for the evangelization of today's world. Leaders that don't just maintain, but inspire, encourage, and exhort their parish to become missionary centres that aren't declining, aren't just maintaining, but are growing. We need visionary leadership. Servant leaders who model their leadership on Christ's own leadership, balancing service and laying down their own lives with empowerment and delegation. We need leaders who know Jesus intimately and draw their strength for leadership from him and not from the opinions of others. Leaders who don't see themselves as the saviour, but with every action and word point to the saviour, Jesus Christ. Leaders that would call parishioners to more through the way they live their lives, but also explicitly in their words and encouragement. That they would understand that in the Christian journey, to love someone means to not allow them to stay the same. Leaders whose conviction about the mission of the church outweighs their fear of what people might think or say. Leaders who are self-aware enough to make sure their own personal issues don't become the parish's issues. I have a dream that leadership teams in our parishes would operate with clarity and purpose because they know their vision, they know their mission, and they're not settling for anything less. That they wouldn't just talk about their dreams, but they would get down into the muck of it and actually make them happen too. Teams that would embrace their role wholeheartedly, stepping courageously and vulnerably into the team and not settling for bickering, backstabbing, or passive-aggressive behaviour that divides. Teams that would model effectively how to work effectively in teams, that would go through all the stages of group development because they know that on the other side of that storming and friction comes the norming and performing. Teams that don't micromanage, but recognise the giftedness of their parishioners and draw them into the heart and ministry of the parish community. Not to just give them a job, but because they know that when you put the right people in the right places, just sit back and watch the magic unfold. Leadership teams who have a sense of urgency for the mission that God has given to the church and who are all in, who will actively seek to change the comfort culture of their parish because they know that growth happens outside our comfort zones. The dream is that clergy and laity would work alongside one another, valuing the gift that each other brings, the unique gift that each other brings, building authentic relationship and challenging one another, loving one another, and encouraging one another in their relationship with God and the call that He has placed on their lives, both individually and collectively. I dream of parish leadership teams that don't get bogged down by bureaucracy, but who are instead the spearhead of the parish, cutting into new territory every time they meet. That any parish meeting wouldn't be something to dread, but it would be looked forward to with anticipation because with it comes newness and freshness and inspiration. Teams who will try new things because they understand that the risk of doing nothing far outweighs the risk of failure. Teams who are all you, not because of their age, but because of the energy and vitality they give off as they live out God's call on their lives. Leadership teams who would throw open the doors of the church, send their parishioners out to invite others back in. Because when leaders lead from this space, we follow. The world needs leaders who will live for something more. Our church needs authentic leaders who will call us out of our comfort zones, who will lead us to where the church has not yet gone but needs to go. In this post-Christendom secular age, the church finds itself in new territory. And as scripture says, for new wine, we need new wineskins. The mission of the church is still the mission of the church, but how we undertake it, well, that's the new wineskin that we need to discover. And we can only do that if we listen to God's Spirit prompting us. Pope Francis said, the parish is not an outdated institution, precisely because it possesses great flexibility. It can assume quite different contours depending on the openness and missionary creativity of the pastor and the community. I dream of leaders in our parishes who are open and embody missionary creativity as they set out to renew their parishes. Finally, Evangelii Gaudium describes the parish as the presence of a church in a given territory, an environment for hearing God's word, for growth in the Christian life, for dialogue, proclamation, charitable outreach, worship, and celebration. It trains its members to be evangelizers and is the center for constant missionary outreach, a community of communities, a sanctuary for the thirsty to come and drink in the midst of their journey. This is the kind of parish I want to support leaders to help build. And this is my dream for our church. Thank you.